Next week, I'm about to drop a video basically taking a victory lap around Mercedes for something I said a few months ago. So for now, I want to go easy on them because I don't hate Mercedes, I just don't like the direction they're headed right now. They barely sell any V8s anymore, they sell hybrid AMGs. The C63 is a 4-cylinder. Is hitting the fan, at least from an enthusiast perspective. So this week I'm gonna cut him a little bit of slack because there's a reason I feel so strongly about the neutering of a legendary German marque. Actually, I used to really like Mercedes. Before my dad started buying BMWs when I was a kid, I didn't really like BMW that much and they hardly existed to me. But I always recognized Mercedes as a luxury brand. But as of late, BMW has just been making cooler enthusiast vehicles. And don't y'all dare bring up the AMG 1. Y'all Mercedes fanboys always do that. Like, find me an AMG 1 for sale right now. Have you even seen an AMG 1? Walk into a Mercedes dealership and try and buy an AMG 1. See how that works out for you. When we're talking about M versus AMG, the lack of variety in M cars is a solid point of argument, but the AMG 1 shouldn't even exist in your mind. Even though that car basically doesn't exist, I still think they made some cool cars over the years. So I put together a list of 5 Mercedes that I think are significant to me. There are iconic vehicles that didn't make this list, and that's fine because this is my opinion. But what I think you're about to witness are still some of the coolest Mercedes out there.
Hi guys, I'm Shmi and you're watching Vinstagram.
The cheapest vehicle I've ever gone above 150 miles an hour in was allegedly 165 miles an hour in my friend's full bolt-on W204 C63. If the cops are watching this, I'm lying to look cool for internet clout points. I cannot provide proof to back up my claims. My friend sold a C63 and bought an M4, and his M4 is sick, but I would have kept the 204 to be honest. This is Mercedes E-X M3 if the E-X M3 actually had low-end torque. This is the frat boy 5th gen Camaro. 6.2 liter naturally aspirated V8, one of the best sounding cross-plane V8s out there. Not quite my top 3, but certainly in my top 10. Also, for how much you pay for these and how old it is, you get a lot of power. For reference, a Camaro SS made 426 horsepower at the time. A 3-valve Mustang made like 300 something. BMW said the M3 was making somewhere in the low 400s, but in reality it was making 300 something. The W204 C63 was making 421 horsepower. The P31 performance package brought it up to 480 horsepower. The 507 edition brought the naturally aspirated V8 up to 507 horsepower. What naturally aspirated V8 was making that kind of power from factory at the time? Not a Ferrari, not a Mustang, not an Aston, not a Jag, not a Lexus. Who was doing this? Nowadays, when companies want to get more power from their V8 icon, they slap a supercharger on it or give it some turbos. I miss when companies would just give it some crazy bolt-ons or even stroke the motor out. Pause. The W212 V63 really only made this list because it looks good and sounds good. The 5.5 liter twin turbo V8 is honestly inferior to the new 4 liter V8, but it sounds good and it looks like a mafia car. Like, I just want to go to Russia and do donuts in the snow while shooting an AK-47 out the side of this thing. I very briefly drove one of these before and it feels not quite as modern as a W213, but the facelift models specifically are the ones I'm talking about, and they do look new enough while still maintaining that late 2000s, early 2010s aesthetic. These days, a W212 facelift looks like what would happen if someone threw a bunch of money into a modern resto mod of a pre-facelift W212. The LED headlights and taillights aren't too far off of what came on the W213, and the interior was also modern enough, with some subtle interior accent lighting that wasn't as gaudy or overt as the newer cars. Just a great looking car. I think the fastest I've ever gone in someone's passenger seat was in a Vicetech Stage 4 W212 E63 Wagon, and the ease with which we got up to 172 miles per hour was insane. The crazy part is the car is so suave that I didn't even notice. It was allegedly 170 until I looked at the dash. Again, if the cops are watching this, I'm lying to look cool in front of random strangers on the internet. Matter of fact, this whole channel is a facade. If I ever buy a Mercedes sedan as a daily driver, it'll be that one. To this day, it's still not a bad car and it doesn't feel terribly dated, even with that ancient phone dial. Like BMWs, there probably is a way to update the infotainment to the latest MBUX software, and that's really all you need. One of my favorite things about it was how when you drive through corners, the seat bolsters adjust and hold you harder depending on the direction you turn. The luxuries in that car still hold up today. And these new bright ass RGB LEDs and big ass screens will not stand the test of time like the interior of this car did. I hardly want to include these two in my top 5 cars list because technically they didn't roll out of the factory this way, but these two vehicles really piqued my interest in the history of Mercedes. Starting off with the M156 swap Ponton build in London. Badass Mercedes Ponton with the same naturally aspirated motor from the W204 C63. Personally, I would have done the aesthetics a little bit differently. Maybe gloss black with more OEM looking chrome trim pieces, but this thing does look sinister, like it's from some old world fantasy. Very diesel punk and or goth punk. Also like that it shares interior components with the C63 that it got its engine from. Just a very nice integration of modern aesthetics and usability inside of a classic car with such a dark aesthetic makes it look like something that came out of an alternate reality. I've seen builds like this done with Mustangs and Chargers, which are still infinitely cool, but I've never seen this done with European cars. Another Mercedes that received similar treatment was another Ponton to Mercedes, where the owner put the M177 twin-turbo V8 from the W205 C63 in the 300 SEL, and replicated the Red Pig race car that was built by AMG when AMG was still its own company. Again, super clean build that somehow they partially swapped the W205 C63 interior into, and the infotainment looks to be mostly functional, which is very impressive. I'm happy they didn't go for some aftermarket head unit and tried to stay as true to OEM as possible. Now that these kinds of builds exist within my reality, I think my dream Mercedes build would be something like a 280 SL with an engine from a W204 C63 and a steering wheel and as much of a dashboard and door card as possible from a W205 that you can squeeze in there. I just like that these cars exist because before I found out about them, I had no clue that anybody was doing these kinds of builds with Mercedes. Since becoming aware of these, I've talked about high-end restoration companies like Banyan Motors who work on old Mercs, and I've just been more open to being interested in classic Mercedes in general. This was a side of car culture I wasn't exposed to as a child and only really just discovered within the past 5 years because, again, this is the kind of stuff I'd see people doing to Mustangs. It's like putting a Coyote in an SN95 with an S550 Mustang dash and center console. To see that being done with a Mercedes just absolutely blows my mind. My dad used to take me to car meets in his BMW and I'd see S54 swap E30s and E36s. I've always been aware of the existence of S65 swap Z4s, E30s, E46s, E87s, and other crazy builds like that. But it never occurred to me that people were doing this to Mercedes. Mercedes always seemed like the kind of car someone bought and just didn't want to touch. Just keep it bone stock, drive it sometimes, always get it serviced at the dealership. I was never aware of this side of the community and I still don't see enough of it. I hear it's more expensive to build and tune Mercedes than it is BMWs. I haven't done any research on that, nor do I feel like phoning a friend right now, so I can't attest to that, so just take that with a grain of salt. I don't doubt some of y'all will be more knowledgeable than me on this subject in the comments. I have my gripes with the new Mercedes SL, and even though I think it's an overall cooler car than the previous gen SL, there's one that's even cooler. Not only has the previous SL been available with a twin-turbo V12 in the SL65, in fact the SL65 Black Series is one of the most legendary Mercedes out there, but the R129 SL73 had a 7.3 liter naturally aspirated V12. It shared its engine with the Pagani Zonda, but get this, it was still 3 times rarer than the Pagani Zonda. They don't even have a category for this on AutoTrader. How are you supposed to buy one of these? If you're asking that question, then you're probably getting too far ahead of yourself. Worry about affording one first, because what the hell? There's only 85 of these out there, 523 horsepower from a naturally aspirated V12. But apparently they're through the roof, and I need to stop thinking about ever owning one, because at that point, give me an 812 GTS and a 911 GT3 Touring. Not the same thing, obviously, but I need to own every vehicle under the sun before I consider buying a 90s Mercedes SL for that much money. They also made an SL72 with a 7.1 liter V12 that I can't find any price data on, and an SL70 that didn't even meet reserve at $182,000. Maybe the R129 life just isn't for me. Retro Mercedes ownership, at least the cool ones, are for a man of a more elevated stature. I've grieved and I've accepted. I love, you love, he, she, me love the Mercedes SLS AMG. The SLS Black Series was really cool, but the Mercedes SLS was only marginally less cool. Basically a 2010s revival of the original 300 SL Gullwing Coupe, but with an even better version of the M156 engine from the C63, the M159. It swapped certain components for aluminum versions to drop weight. It had forged pistons, and it made even more power than the C63 Black Series at 583 horsepower. The Black Series somehow squeezed even more power out of this engine at 622 horsepower. Absolutely insane. Does anybody remember that time Kevin Hart got caught lacking and couldn't even reach the door on his SLS? That was funny. I remember I was like 5'6" all the way through high school, and then somehow started growing again after high school. Now I'm like 5'10"-ish. To these 5'1" girls, I'm like 6'2". But I was scared I was gonna stop growing. I was like, damn, when I get super rich and start buying all these cars I put in my Google Chrome bookmarks, and I finally get that SLS Black Series, am I seriously gonna get caught lacking in public by the paparazzi because I'm also gonna be super famous and rich? That was the mental struggle of the decade, because I still need an SLS in my life. Even give me the convertible. The vert could go hard. I've always been a big proponent of convertibles, even though they look worse when the top is up, but the top down vibes from behind the wheel are just unmatched. The Gullwing doors are cool, but people like the verts too. I think at one point, they might still be, actually don't hold me on this, but at one point I feel like the verts were trading at higher values than the non-Black Series Gullwing coupes. Either way, insanely cool vehicle. It's sad that Mercedes doesn't make a front mid-engine V8 coupe anymore. I've always been a sucker for a good G-Wagon. Not gonna lie though, people who drive a G-Wagon on a daily basis do it for the aesthetic, because they actually kind of suck to drive at speed. They have the aerodynamics of a cinder block, so a gust of wind can actually send you into another lane. But I love a big boxy SUV. Broncos, old Blazers, Blazers but not new ones, old and new Land Cruisers, old Wranglers, old and new Defenders, you name it. But the most iconic one has to be the G-Wagon, and not enough people appreciate the G-Wagon beyond the new G63s and 4x4s. My ideal new G-Wagon would have to be a G450D with the diesel inline 6. Lifted up a couple inches, put portal axles on it, but not with the wide body kit you get on the 4x4. But unfortunately, they don't sell diesel G-Wagons in America. Even though G-Wagons have pretty much been relegated to mall crawler status and people are scared to damage their brand new Mercedes-Benz. These things are off-roading monsters. If you gave me an unlimited budget to buy the best new off-roader on the market, I'm honestly not even thinking about a Raptor or a TRX. I'm going straight for that new G63 4x4. People always like to talk shit about Whistling Diesel because, oh, he could be giving that kind of money to starving children in Africa. Why is he wasting a perfectly good car just to burn it to the ground? Honestly, his durability tests are some of the most strenuous you can find on the internet. Like, who else is doing this? People kept saying Ferrari was going to send him a cease and desist, but I think even they were probably interested in seeing how well that car held up to his test. And until he drove it through a dry cornfield where honestly any car with an exhaust in that kind of location would have caught on fire, it was holding up pretty well. And as long as he wasn't disrespecting the badges or anything, that's great PR for Ferrari. I think there are a lot of exotic cars out there that wouldn't have even made for a series that long. It would have made for like one 20-minute Whistling Diesel video where the car would be undrivable by the end of it. If you really want to know if a car is built different, Cody will find out, and the G-Wagon was definitely holding its own. We've seen Raptors break from less, and might I remind you, these G-Wagons have more or less been on the same chassis since the 90s. Ultimately though, my dream G-Wagon is a previous gen W461 Banyan Motors build with a crate motor from a G500, or maybe even an old diesel Mercedes V8. I bet y'all didn't even know that at one point the G-Wagon could be had with a 5-cylinder. I really enjoy looking into the history of the G-Wagon and G-Wagon adjacent vehicles, especially military history. No, not that history, you're about 3 decades too late. Although I would highly recommend looking into how that period of time affected the trajectory of BMW, Porsche, Audi, and Mercedes. Really interesting stuff. But while G-Wagon builds are few and far between, I can always appreciate one. I've only ever seen one Banyan Motors build, and that's because you're essentially paying new G63 money for an old ass G-Wagon with a motor from a mid-tier new G-Wagon. But I genuinely think I would take a $250,000 G-Wagon build over a new G63 all day. I really like the newer G-Wagons throughout the 2010s, but after driving a G-Wagon 4x4 for a few days, I realized I'd never want to daily drive a G-Wagon. I just want it for off-roading and vibes. Also, the 4x4 is just entirely too conspicuous. And if you drive a G-Wagon 4x4 on a daily basis, you honestly weren't hugged enough as a child. That is an attention whore of a car, and you have to be an attention whore to drive it every day. Like, I can't lie, driving a flashy car is cool every once in a while, but that car turns heads on every block. I don't care if you're in Monaco, Luxembourg, Zurich, Beverly Hills, Brickell, people notice this vehicle. Like, not everybody's gonna look at an Aventador, especially in a subtle black or white spec, but everybody's gonna look at a big ass G-Wagon 4x4. Dudes who drive big 8-inch lifts on F-250s and stuff, this is the effect they think they have on the general public. I had a girl lean her body out of her boyfriend's car just to tell me she liked the G-Wagon. I'm like, bruh, it's 11 p.m. I'm just trying to go home.